Hey everybody, welcome to the Play Guitar Podcast live streaming Monday event. I hope everybody's doing great today. Just getting things started. If you're new here, welcome. It's very cool to have you. What we do is we have a little bit of a chat going on during the podcast. I take breaks throughout the podcast and look at answer some questions, look at some comments, all of those things. Let's go ahead right now, actually, and take a look at the chat here. Got Dean and Evan and Joe's here. Talking about some recording that Evan's doing, some cool stuff. Coke's here. Okay, so we got a good crowd here. We're going to be talking about fun chords. When you learn some songs, you've got a little bit under your belt, you know some chords, and you start to learn some different songs, some things that catch your ear, and you find out that there's some extra chords in there. And we're learning those extra chords, learning some new sounds, and it's always fun to me. And I've kind of went from beginners all the way to advanced, so I've got a little bit for everybody in this one. We've got some chords that you notice right away when you're a beginner learning songs, and intermediate, and then also some advanced fun chords too. My three favorite chords there. So we're going to get started in just a second. I'm still setting some things up here. Make sure, okay, got the close-up going there. Everything's functioning the way it should. Make sure if anybody can, I want to make sure that my audio is working well. If anybody in the chat can hear me, just give me a 1 in the chat. I think that would help. Just let me know that everything's coming across fine. Having some issues with my camera today, so if out in the middle of nowhere you see a bunch of stuff on the screen, it'll go away in a few seconds. But we're just going to wait and make sure that I get a few 1s in here before we get started. And okay. Audio and video are great. Thank you. So we're going to play some chords today. I'm going to, I got my notes here. I'm going to go ahead and get the podcast going. As you all know, sometimes I get started and something's not quite right and I have to start over again. So hopefully we'll get it on the first time here. So let's go ahead and start with the intro. One of my favorite things about learning songs is coming across new and interesting chords. Today I'll go through 3 of my favorite types of chords and show you how to use them in your own playing. So stay tuned. Okay, I did it again, didn't I? Just hit record. Gonna start record. Here we go. Take 2. One of my favorite things about learning songs is coming across new and interesting chords. Today I'll go through 3 of my favorite types of chords and show you how to use them in your own playing. So stay tuned. Hello and welcome, friends, to episode 129 of the Play Guitar Podcast. I'm Lee, and this is the podcast that's determined to make you a better guitar player. No matter if you're just starting out or you've been playing for years, this is the show that will help you become the guitarist that you always wanted to be. One of my favorite things about learning songs, those new chords, the ones that grab your attention. In the beginning, we work so hard, we get our basic chords, our open position chords, then we start working on our bar chords. And when we finally get to master them and we get into learning songs, I know I was just content to be able to play the songs. I was happy. But then it happens. You come across this one chord and it stops you in your tracks. You say, oh my gosh, I got to play that. How do I do it? And most of the time, players now, they quickly look it up. They find the tab or the chord boxes for the song, and they learn the pattern, and then they're happy. I got it. I got the song, and that's good enough. And then they move on. Problem is, don't stop there. Just being able to play a chord from a shape, you're leaving a lot on the table. Today, I'm going to take a look at 3 types of really fun and very interesting sounding chords, and I'm going to show you how to make them your own, and I'm going to show you how to use them in lots of different situations. The first one we're going to talk about today is slash chords. This is the first one that on into beginners and early intermediate players, where you come across this one and you take a look at it and you think, what's that? When you see it, you go, that looks like it's going to be complicated. And most people, they'll steer clear of it. They'll just be like, forget it. I'll just skip that chord and move on to the next one. But slash chords are really, really easy, incredibly easy. And they actually make sense. You just need a little bit of knowledge. They're just regular chords. And what happens is the first letter is your chord. And then after the slash, it tells you what note to play in the bass. That's it, right? Not too complicated. First letter is the chord. After slash, that's what the lowest note is. Let's take a look at a few of the most common chords that you might find when you're learning guitar songs in slash chords. I'm going to get close up on this here. There we go. The one that comes up the most in my lessons is the D over F Sharp chord, and looks a little bit like this. This is a chord that's frequently found in songs where you go from like G and then you go to E minor. See what I just did right there? I actually worked my way up from E minor, D over F sharp, and G. And you hear it the other way too, G. Okay? You can see F sharp on the low string. And since we know that the guitar has an E string on the low and an E string on the high here, if we can do it on the low string, we can do it on the high string. Well, look what happens when I move that up to the high string. It's our regular D chord. Pretty much we just took this top note, which is an F sharp, and we moved it down to the bass. I'm not playing my high E string, just my D, the F sharp, and the bass. Now, we're going to talk about in a minute, having a walking bass line, which is what we're doing here. But you can see how it transitions very nicely. It doesn't sound like a blocked chord. It has a nice line that goes down. And if you're doing a fingerstyle guitar, especially, you're doing not in a full band, it's a really, really nice way to go. Let's take a look at another common chord that you see written as a slash chord. So here's our regular A. And one of the places that you'll find an A with a slash chord in is with a C sharp in the bass. You can see here, we're going to have an open A string on a regular A, and then when you add your C sharp, that's the 4th fret on the A string, it covers up that A. You can't hear the low A note anymore. I hear these a lot, A going to D, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute too. So when you're going from a 1 chord to a 4 chord, and we're going to get into how this works in a few minutes. But both of these, what we're doing is we're replacing our root note. What we're doing with both these is we're replacing our root note with another note. And this brings me up to the topic of inversions, right? What's an inversion? You've heard of a chord in first inversion, second inversion, third inversion. And an inversion is pretty much the same thing as a slash chord. It's a chord that uses another note, another one of its notes as the bass note. First inversion uses the third note of the scale. So you can make an argument that this A is in third inversion, in first inversion. The third note is in the bass. And where we get that, if you haven't had much chord theory yet, chords come from scales. And basically, you get your chord notes from every other note. So if you were going to build an A chord off of an A major scale, you take the first note, the third note, and the fifth note. Those are your chord notes right there. So that's why we call this as the third. Second inversion would use the fifth note of the scale. So in A, the fifth note is an E. If you played your low E, you can make an argument that that would be in second inversion. Third inversion uses seventh chords. That's where the seventh note of the scale would be in the bass right there. I try not to use the word inversions too much for the guitar, and here's why. When you take music theory classes, sometimes there's some very strict theory rules about the order of the notes of a chord for first inversion, third inversion, fifth inversion. You'll see the chords written stacked, where on a note you see a C. Let's do a C major chord, a C, an E, and a G. Right? That's our 1, 3, 5. And then to get to first inversion, it's typically thought you take the root and move it up an octave, and that leaves the third as the lowest note. Problem with that, well, in piano, it's very easy to do because everything's laid out very plainly on the piano. You can stack those notes exactly how you want them. But on the guitar, because of the way our strings overlap, it's not easy to voice a chord with 1, 3, 5, in order like that. It just doesn't work that way very well without some really, really big stretches on the guitar. So most of the chords that we learn on guitar are out of order. The notes are mixed up. You might have 1 on the bottom and then 5, and then 3 after that, or a double of 1, and then another 5. There's doubles of notes. They're jumbled up. We'll take on guitar. We'll take any chord note that we can get that's close to where our hand is there. So that's why I prefer to use the term slash chords instead of inversions, because slash chords, the meaning basically, it means you can put any note that you want after the slash, and that's your bass note, whether it's a chord note or not a chord note, any note that you want for when you see that in a song. So let's talk about, let's see here. One of the situations you find, okay, got it. So to demonstrate what I was talking about with sometimes in a slash chord, the bass note isn't in the actual chord yourself. You hear this a lot. Let me switch to a close up here. So especially using a D chord, you'll see people playing a regular D chord, and then they'll move it around. So I'm playing a D triad with a D in the bass, then I'm playing a G triad but keeping a pedal tone, a D in the bass, and then an A triad. Think of it like the drone note in like a bagpipe player. You've ever seen that they have one note that's going all the time, and then they play all the other music on top of it. So let's take this A triad here. So the key of A, we have an E, we have an A, and a C sharp. So A, C sharp, E, those are the three notes in an A triad. But we have this D going down here. D's not in this chord, but it sounds pretty nice with that D drone going in there when we're using this A chord moved around a little bit. And so you would see that A/D. So that would be an A chord with a D in the bass. D's not in the key, but it tells you exactly what you would play. Okay, so let's talk about these chords that I demonstrated before. The D over F sharp chord. Talk about how to play these chords. We talked about it's a passing chord, usually between the G and the E minor. Clapton's song "Wonderful Tonight" is a great example of this. It's a very smooth transition between the bass notes, and this is the primary use for slash chords. The A over the C sharp. Now, when we were moving from G to D over F sharp to E minor, that's a whole different chord altogether. It's a passing chord, but the A over C sharp is a little bit different. You'll see this a lot where a few strums on A, and then a few strums on A over C sharp, and listen, it wants to go somewhere. That C sharp gives you a little tension. It's wanting to move. It's wanting to go to a D chord. So A over C sharp. It's still functioning as an A chord. It's not any different. And it goes right to that D chord right there. So that bass line is leading us up, even though the chord isn't functioning any different. Okay? But let's talk about when not to play a slash chord. So when you're in a band situation where you may have another instrument playing the bass, you may want to ignore this altogether. So if you have a music that has a slash chord right there, and there's a lot of low end going on in the bass, you don't necessarily have to play the slash chord at all. You can ignore it altogether because you have other instruments that are taking that responsibility. So when you have too many instruments competing for that low frequency, that same space, sometimes it's best to just leave it out. So you would just play in the case of A over C sharp, you just play an A chord right there, and it would function just fine. Okay, so I'm going to take a break here. I'm going to head over to the chat, see how things are going. Kevin, nailed the intro. Yeah, nailed it. Nailed it again, right. Let's see here. All right. Scroll up to view chat. Thought my chat froze and I didn't realize it for so maybe others froze too. Josh is here. Hey. Okay, the chat froze for everybody. Is it back on now? Just let me know if you can hear me. You can. Hopefully the chat didn't freeze permanently. Josh is here, just listening, but he's got to drive. Good to see you, Josh. Great to see you. I'm still showing that everything's moving ahead on my YouTube app. I'm just waiting for the chat to see if Let's see, I'm going to pop this chat out real quick. See how it's going. Oh, goodness. I don't know. Chat may have froze. Evan says chat looks fine to me. Awesome. That's great. That's great. Okay. So we're going to continue on here with part 2. We're going to talk about some suspended chords in just a second. Okay, part 2, suspended chords. What's a suspended chord? Well, these are chords you find as you're learning songs. Usually, I would say in intermediate, that's where I hear about people wondering about suspended chords the most. It's commonly thought of a chord where the third is replaced by one of two notes, either the fourth or the second. Let me fix this real quick. So a sus4 chord is where, we're going to take this D for example. So the sus4 chord, we would take the third of the chord. In the case of D, it's the F sharp, and we're going to replace it with the fourth. Now take a listen to that. It's a neat sound. Suspended chords are really, really cool sounding chords. And when you see something, a D sus chord or anything like that, you would normally do this, replace that third with the fourth. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you can replace the third note of the chord with the second. Here's a D sus2 chord. So I removed my F sharp in my D chord and let the open E string ring. E in the key of D is the second. So it has a very different sound than the sus4. Here's the sus2. So the sound of a suspended chord is very interesting. Most chords that we play have some sort of a third in it. And the third note of the scale determines whether it's a major sound, happy, or a minor sound, which is sad. In both of these cases, both of the suspended chords, sus4 and sus2, there is no third. So it's not a happy sound. It's not a sad sound. It's very different. To me, it sounds like it's not at rest. It feels like it needs to move somewhere. It wants to go somewhere. And the longer that you play a suspended chord, the more and more tension builds. Let's look at I know what I'll do. I'll switch cameras for this one. If I fix this, there we go. So let's look at a C sus4 and a sus2. Let's take a look there. So here's our regular C major chord. Our third is being played on the D string, the second fret with our second finger. Now if I made this sus4, all I have to do is tuck my pinky underneath here on the third fret on the A string. And when I let go and go back to the third, it resolves. Now if I wanted to use it as a sus2 chord, I'd just lift my second finger and it resolves back to the regular chord. So I'll do them both again. Here's now the sus2. Both of them wanted to resolve. Now this is to a major chord. One thing is I was not playing the high E string because that's the third. I was leaving that out, so I'm muting the high E string there. I'm only playing the C major, the inside 4 strings. But what happens if you had a minor chord, a C minor? So, let's see here. I'm just going to play these 3 notes right here, a C minor triad, C, E flat, and G. I'm using the A, the D, and the G strings. Now, what if I went up to the 4th and covered up that E flat, which is the minor third? Still works. I think the resolution from the sus4 to the major third is much stronger than the let's see here. It's much stronger than the minor, but it works. Might be a song. So it's a really neat chord to use in very certain situations. And one of the uses that's the best way to use this is when you have a long time to play one chord. So say you have 4 measures and you're just playing a D chord. Here's the second measure. What I was doing was, on the 4th beat of each measure, I was lifting up that F sharp and getting the sus2 sound. It adds interest. Here's D without it. It's okay now. It's starting to get old, right? Now it's really getting old. Something needs to happen. So when you have a long time where you have to play one chord, using the suspended chords can add interest to your song, and they don't change the functioning of the chord. It won't be wrong to play that over those. It adds just a little bit of neat sound to it. The Who used them a ton. There's a ton of the Who's most popular songs that are based on a suspended chord. Really, really neat sound. All right, so I'm going to take another little break. That was my suspended chords. I've got one more chord we're going to go to. I'm going to check the chat real quick. Looks like it's working. Sus chords are great. Add so much to a simple strum. That's right. Pretty sure that's in a popular song. Brennan's here. Hey, Brennan. Good to see you. Dean's here. Sounds pretty. Thanks, man. That was fun. Coke's here. And Dino. Good to see you, Dino. And Joe likes the sound of the suspended chord. So Brennan says, hey, Evan, I like your version of your song. Yes, Evan's song is really coming along great. And Brennan says, sus chords are some of my favorites. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to go on to the last section here. And we're going to talk about diminished 7th chords. So a little bit more advanced. Okay. Part 3, diminished 7th chords. What's a diminished 7th chord? Well, it's a very tense chord. And it's constructed of 3 minor third intervals. So minor third, minor third, minor third. That's the space of 3 frets on the guitar. It has a very familiar sound to people. It's just kind of a scary sound. Back when they would have silent movies, and you would have a organist or usually organist or piano player or something like that who's trying to make the the music fit the emotions of the movie, they would use all sorts of different diminished chords and augmented chords for different sounds. And would be the scary sound. It's like the time when you see the guy with the hat and the barbell mustache. He's got the lady tied to the railroad tracks and the train's coming, right? It's a very tense sound, but it's the way we would hear it in popular songs is different than that. It's used a little bit more to support other chords. Well, let's take a look at it right now. So here, I'll switch over here. Here is the standard way of playing a diminished seventh chord. You have, I'm going to do this on, this is a G diminished seventh. This is, I've got my pinky and my third finger playing at the third fret on the high E and the G strings, separated by one string. That string behind it, I have my second finger playing at the second fret, and another second fret with my first finger on the D string. So it's kind of like if you go from the D string up, it's second fret, third fret, second fret, third fret. And a neat thing that you've been hearing me play about the diminished seventh chord is it repeats every 3 frets. That's the same chord, but you don't have to change the pattern with it. So let's check that out with this. We've got an E, a B flat, a D flat, and a G in this at the second position. Now if I slide this up 3 frets, let's see what these notes are here. We have a G, well, we have a D flat, we have an E, and a B flat. Same notes, same exact notes, they're just scrambled up, they're just in a different order. Let's try it up another 3 frets. Let's see here, we have a B flat, we have an E, we have a G, and then on top we have a D flat. Same notes, different order. And then the last time we're going to go up, this is up at the 11th fret. We have our D flat, G, B flat, and on the high string at the 12th fret, the high E. I always thought that was super interesting, that it just repeats and the notes automatically match up right away. It's really neat how it works. And also the diminished scale is very similar to that. It's a series of whole steps and half steps back and forth, and it's very angular the way the patterns work out. So and another way you could voice that is if you did it, if you took that high note and moved it down to the bottom note. So you get a little bit more of a bass note in there. So let's talk about the uses of a diminished seventh chord. Well, there's 2 main uses that it's used for. One, it's used as a passing chord, and the other way it's used as a substitute chord. And for one chord in particular we're going to talk about. But let's talk about it as a passing chord. The first place that I really used the diminished seventh chord was in blues. So let's play this, a blues in A. Let's do it fast. Right there. Now, when I first learned a blues that used a diminished seventh chord right after the 4 chord, that was one of those times where my ear said, whoa, stop. What is that chord? I have to learn that chord. It adds a desire for upward movement. So we're playing in A. At some point we get to our D7 chord. I'm playing a D9, which is a version of a D7. And then we play our D sharp diminished 7th chord. It wants to go up to an E. And E is the 5th of our 1 chord. So it brings us really nicely back to a note that's in our 1 chord. Very nice to outline as well with a lead over that chord using the half-whole diminished scale as well. So that's as a passing chord. Going from a blues is the first place I ran into it. But there's another place that a lot of you may have heard before, and that's going from just a regular 1 chord, a triad, just like an A chord, right? And your next chord might be, this is an A, your next chord might be a 2 minor chord, right? So going from an A to a B minor. Lots of songs. Have you ever heard that before? That is a really common, it has kind of a 50s sound to it, but it's a really common way to move from a 1 chord to a 2 minor chord. And how we're doing that here is we have our A major, then we have a B flat diminished 7. So 1/2 step above the root chord, the 1 chord, which leads us from B flat to B minor. It's a really nice transition in between 2 pretty simple chords there. So it's not even in blues, it's not even using 7th chords, but it's a really nice sound. It's a really nice sound. Another way to think of this is as a substitute chord. Now, in the key of A, the common jazz progression is a 2-5-1 or a 1-6 minor, 2-5 to 1. Okay? And when we move from 1 and we use this diminished 7th chord, you can actually think of it as a substitute for that 6 minor chord, the F sharp minor. Or what's the difference? Here we go. That's with the F sharp. Here's with the diminished 7th. It's a really good use for that to substitute for the 6 minor chord. It gives you a nice walking bass line that walks up to the 2 chord and then ultimately to the 5 chord. But another really cool way of using this is using this in place of a 7th chord. So staying in A, so we're going to go from a A7 chord, and in blues our next chord is a D7th chord. Okay? Now, the notes from a D7th chord are very similar to a D sharp diminished chord. There's only one note difference, and that's the D sharp itself. And it can be used as a substitute chord for the D7. So I could use, I worked it back here. Here's my D7. Here's my D sharp diminished 7. We know it repeats every 3 frets. So right here at the 4th fret, it's in position close to my A7 chord that I was using. So I could play blues. I'm going to use it for the E7 chord. Now, it admittedly has it has a very tense sound because it uses the flat 9 of the chord. It uses that D sharp that we replaced the D note with is a half step away from the root. So it's got a very tense sound. When it played it over the 5th, it was really out. But it worked nicely over the 4 chord though. But you'll hear that over all sorts of dominant 7th chords. So it can be used in jazz, it can be used in rock, it can be used in funk. There's a whole lot of different ways of using the diminished 7th chord over top of 7th chords. So just something to bring to your attention. I know some of the people here are not into using the diminished 7th chords yet, and that's okay. But just hearing about this and understanding that there are these chords that have different sounds than what we're used to, more tense sounds, and can be used as passing chords, and they're not difficult to learn. They're very easy to learn, and you'll be headed in that direction at some time. Okay, so that is the podcast for today. Those are the 3 types of chords that are really fun to learn in your different stages of learning: the slash chords for beginners, the suspended chords for intermediate players, and then some diminished 7th chords for more advanced players. Very happy to bring those to you today, and I have a free gift for you. It's my guide to clear sounding chords. So if you've ever had a hard time getting your C major chord to sound clear, if your fingers have been getting in the way, you've been muting strings, you've been getting extra buzzes, all of those things, I have a guide for you that takes you step by step through each of the caged chords, the C, A, G, E, D, and also the F chord. Gives you each thing to look out for each chord, where to experiment with placing your fingers to get them out of the way of the other strings, and also how far up to move them. It takes you every step of the way. It's at playguitaracademy.com/chord guide, and it's free for you. Just head on over there and pick it up. And I'm going to go ahead and end it for today. Thank you so much. That's a wrap. Thanks for joining me today for the Play Guitar Podcast. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player. Also, I really appreciate if you could leave a review for the show. If you're just starting or you're new to the guitar, head on over to Start Here Guitar. Check out my premium 11-week beginner's course, and it gives you the foundations you need to move forward correctly on the guitar. Make sure you follow me on all of my different social media pages. Links to them are at playguitaracademy.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next episode. Did it. Okay. And thanks to everybody for hanging out with me today. I hope the chat's back working again. Let me go check out here. We'll just hang out a little bit. It was a shorter one today. I'm going to get rid of my guitar here so I can lean over and see what's going on. Okay, so let's see here. Mark says, I'll have to get the normal chords down first. That's right. Hey, Mark, good to see you. Thanks for hanging out with me. Evan says, I've only ever fumbled out songs before by brute force. This time I'm trying to use some knowledge I've gained lately to figure out how to put a song together so it feels like the first one. Cool. And Coke says, even after getting the normal chords down, I think I might be a lazy guitar player because I'm just like, I can't be bothered with that. This chord is good enough. And yeah, that's how when you're learning songs and you get to that point where you're comfortable. It's very common, but it doesn't last forever. Once you are really comfortable with these chords, you start hearing some other sounds. So I remember Paul McCartney and I think it was George Harrison. They were talking about how when they were growing up, before they were famous, they were in Liverpool, and they they were playing this song and they kept missing that one chord, the chord that was just awesome. And they found out some guy across town knew how to play that chord. I guess people were talking, and so they took the bus across town to find this guy and have him teach him that chord. So at some point your ears you'll get past that comfort stage where, okay, I've got these, but my ear is developing. And once your ear develops, you start thinking about, oh, I need to get that new sound. It'll happen. Evan says, Diminished sounds like the sound of Along Came Jones, but the guy did Charlie Brown. Yeah. David's here. Good to see you, David. Evan's here. And Joe, I did get your message. I was just right in the middle of preparing for this show, so I didn't have a chance to watch the whole video, but I'm going to take a look at it in probably a few minutes after we're done here. And Brennan says, a fun 2-chord jam can also be made out of diminished seventh with a minor chord a whole step below. Yeah, that is fun. That's a good thing. I like all these things. And Coke loves 2-chord songs. Yeah, that's right. Can't beat them. Don't have to learn that third chord, right? And Dave says, I'll have to miss most of this podcast. That's okay, man. It's good to see you. I hope everything's good. Our weather has cleared up. The humidity is about half of it was yesterday. It was a beautiful day today. Not quite as hot either. So we're finally having a good afternoon of weather. I hope everybody got their videos that I put out yesterday afternoon. Anybody has any questions about them, please let me know. Gloria's here. Hey, Gloria, good to see you. How you doing today? I got the recording going. It's still going. It looks like everything's going pretty smooth. I can go ahead and stop the audio recording here and the video recording. I'll do that right now. Well, this has been a good Monday. All I had to do was get ready for the podcast today, and I had a really fun time putting this together and playing some stuff. I jammed a little bit on these chords before we started. It was fun. Gloria got hers. That's great. David says, enjoy it, because once you get the floor, it just stays hot. Yeah. It does here too. Just we're not quite at it yet. We're having the kind of back and forths, but it starts. We get Florida weather for a much shorter amount of time than you get, and it gets cold here in the wintertime. Not cold enough to snow. It does get cold enough to snow where we're at, but when the front comes through, when the storm front comes through where you think it would snow, it raises the temperature just enough that it doesn't snow here. So, but we still get the really, really, really cold stuff, just not the snow. And Coke says he did dig diminished seventh chords. Yeah, they're neat, man. It's different. I like augmented chords too. And once they sound really funny alone. They don't stand on their own really well. But once you can use them to your advantage and throw them in different places, it's really good for your ear. Slash chords are the ones I'm like, yeah. Slash chords they're just major and minor. They're not well, I guess they can be seventh chords too. They usually see them as major triads, and you can just. If you're a solo acoustic player, they're great. They add more interest in the low end of the song. But rarely in a band situation would I play slash chords. I would let the bass player tackle that. I usually would just play something different. And Dean says, you do not know what cold is. I didn't grow up here. I know cold. I've been there. We would go to the marching band that I played with, we would go to the Winter Carnival in Quebec, and in Montreal. We would go to Montreal and play out. It's no fun trying to play music out in the freezing cold. Dave's going to have to try joint shifting on Saturday. I haven't had a chance to. I have not had a chance to look at Steve Vai's new stuff yet. Maybe tonight. I had a whole weekend of coaching videos, and then today all day was getting the podcast together. So maybe tonight after dinner, which I'm looking forward to. This is going to be a good day today. Good day today. Every once in a while you get a good day. Probably because I haven't looked at the news today yet. So got a really, really, really cool email from an email list member. I don't want to say his name yet, but really nice that the podcast has been helping him out a ton. So I'm looking forward to responding to him. And I also want to respond to Joe. I saw he left I saw just a few seconds of it. So I'm going to take a look at that too. Well, we did it. We made it through another weekend. Got to the beginning of the week. Got to the podcast. Did our hangout. Did our guitar talk, and we did our Friday show guitar news, which I'm still a little shaky on. I want to get looking nicer, and I really would like to get. I find it really distracting when people read the news and that they're looking down here or they're looking off in the monitor. I really want to get some sort of a teleprompter, and not something that rolls the footage on it, but something that where I can put another computer screen. So if I have to look at the computer screen, it's right in the camera. And Dave says, don't let Joe get too far ahead of me. Okay. All right. I enjoyed this video. I enjoyed his playing. It was good playing, man. Coke says, once it's below 20 degrees, it honestly doesn't matter anymore. That's when you start questioning your survival going outside, and every degree lower just lowers your survival time outdoors. Yeah. Speaking of the winter carnival that we would go to, we would play in high school, and I remember they would have ice sculptures everywhere, and they would have the driveways with the tarps over them, so you wouldn't have to shovel out the snow. You could just walk. It was like an igloo that went to the front of your driveway, so your car was underneath there, and everybody was out in it. And I grew up in Delaware, which is not that cold. It gets cold there, but not like that. And I couldn't understand why everybody was out all the time. And then I realized they all had these canes that they were walking around with. And so, wow, everybody's using a cane here. And I thought, well, maybe it's because of the ice. They didn't want to slip on the ice or something like that. And then at some point I saw someone screw off the top of the cane and take a big drink. They were filled with whiskey. So good way to get through the cold, I think. Remember that stayed with me. But David says, we say the same thing in Florida for 98. Yeah, once it gets over 98 degrees, it's stinking hot, right? That's right. Okay, everybody, I'm going to pack up in just a few minutes. I've already recorded my intros and outros, so I don't have to go through that with everybody today. You're watching me just repeat the same thing over and over and over again until I get it right. Minnesota has miles of skyways, so you can get through the city without going out. Oh, that's cool, man. And Mark says, I have that cane. Right? Yeah, man. Coke says, right, I've lived in Florida to Arizona. I'll take 105 in Arizona over 95 in Florida any day. It's different, isn't it? It's a different kind of hot there. Well, everybody, I wish you a great week. I'll be doing a lot of editing, making 3 videos and and editing the podcast over the next couple days taking a little bit of a breather on Thursday before we get back at it again on Friday. I really appreciate everybody hanging out with me today. And try some of those diminished seventh chords. I'm going to make, for the videos, I'll have some chord charts that pull up on the screen. So if you're interested in trying, if you haven't tried any of these chords, take a look at the videos that are coming out in the next couple days. That you should have a really easy to see chord box right on the screen right there. All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'm going to call it. Thanks, Brennan and Kevin and Coke and Mark, Dean and David and Gloria, Evan, and let's see, Dino was here, Joe, and Josh was here, but he was driving, so it was good to see you. Thanks for popping in. And okay. All right. Well, I'll see you guys on Friday. Have a great week.